Hey guys, today we're going to be talking about the secret behind Stevie Ray Vaughan's tone, and we're going to give you a complete guide in which you can work through and tick off and see if you can get anywhere close to Stevie's tone yourself. So let's get into it. Okay, so before we start, it's important to know that one of these points alone won't get you anywhere close to Stevie's tone. It's the accumulation of all of these different points that made Stevie so amazing when it comes to guitar tone. Now, we often see comments on YouTube saying,
well, of course Stevie's tone sounded huge and thick because he used gauge 13 strings.
Sure, those things might add up to the overall melting pot at the end. Again, Stevie was an accumulation of all of these different methods coming up. Now, the first point we have to mention is, of course, the vintage guitars that Stevie used. Now, Stevie's main guitar was, of course, his #1 Strat, which was a mismatch of 59 parts and 63 parts, apparently. The legend has it that this neck was huge and fat, equipped with big, heavy jumbo frets, high action, a nitro finish which was pretty much worn all the way down to the wood in most places. A lot of people speculate whether this added to the breathiness of the tone because you're hearing more of the wood's sound as opposed to the thick lacquer. I mean, that's probably a whole different debate, but let us know in the comments what you think to that. We recently did a video comparing 13 gauge strings to 9 gauge strings, and quite honestly, the general consensus from ourselves and most people watching, even over a blind test, was that the heavier gauge strings really didn't make a difference. Again, it's just one small piece of the puzzle. Obviously, vintage Strats are very hard to come by now and very expensive if you can find one. But the good news is that there's great alternatives out there. We recently did a video on how to get the SRV tone on a budget, featuring a £400 Fender Squier in a shootout against our vintage 63 Strat. Again, there wasn't that much difference. So I would say nowadays you can very comfortably buy something like a Squier, a Mexican Strat, or a Japanese Strat. Japanese Strats are great, by the way. They are like on par with the American USA Fender quality, but for almost half the price. But if you'd like to go for the full fat version, the USA version, you can either spend your money on a USA Strat or go to the upper echelon of Strats and visit the Fender custom shop. Now, Stevie's amp collection and rig on stage and in the studio is absolutely ludicrous. I read something once saying that, well, I think it was on the In Step album, that Stevie had something like, I think it's like 36 amps all hooked up at once, which is unfathomable to the average guitarist like us. And it's just, yeah, but it makes sense why the accumulation of all those vintage Fender amps and Marshalls and Dumbles being combined together adds to this absolutely monstrous tone that we hear. Throughout Stevie's whole career, he used a Fender Vibroverb, a 1964 version. He also loved and favoured Super Reverb amps. The combination of the 15-inch speaker on the Vibroverb and the 4x10 speaker configuration on the Super Reverb blended together is the perfect dynamic together. I mean, if you listen to the Elmer Combo live record, you can hear those two amps working together with a symbiotic relationship, and it just merges perfectly. And I would say the raw Elmer Combo tone that you can hear, it doesn't get much better if you're looking for a reference tone on Stevie's tone. Now, it's said that Stevie actually favoured Marshall amps for his clean tone, which catches everyone by surprise when they first hear it. Nowadays, I'd say that you can't really go wrong with buying something like a Fender Deluxe Reverb reissue. That's what I've used for years, and it gets you very close to certainly the tones I'm trying to chase, which are in the Stevie vein of playing. We recently bought a 1964 Vibroverb, like we were saying Stevie used, and to be honest, it is the closest I've personally ever got to Stevie's tone because it just has that extra bite and trebliness to the tone, which can't really be replicated on any other amp. Maybe the Super Reverb can if it's cranked, but by the way, that's something that I was going to mention. More importantly than the amp choice, I'd say that getting the volume cranked on any of these amps and getting the tubes working the circuitry warmed up. You want to get the amp as loud as you can. If you've got something like a super reverb or a deluxe reverb and you've got the amp's volume on like 1 or 2, it's really not being used in its optimum context, and you'll hear that through the speaker. It's just very clean and sterile. Whereas if you get it to the edge of breakup, you're going to start to hear those Stevie tones come alive. Now, if you can't crank your amp, I'd say a good way to combat this would be to use an attenuator. I've used one for years, and we're actually going to do a proper video on attenuators soon and talk you through our recording setup. So if you guys want to see that, please let us know in the comments. Now, as a pedal company ourselves, it would be sacrilegious to not mention Stevie's pedals. It's funny because Stevie wasn't a massive pedal user, but when he did use them, it just changed the game. And in fact, guys like us and you watching presumably, we're all still chasing those pedal tones that Stevie had all those years back. And it was actually a very basic pedal setup. Now, of course, the pedal that Stevie Ray Vaughan used throughout his whole career was in fact the pedal porn Texan Twang. No, we can't leave that in, we're gonna get killed. No, but seriously, of course, Stevie used the Tube Screamer throughout his whole career, and he progressively moved up the models as they came out. So it went TS808, TS9, and then TS10. We did a really in-depth episode with Andertons once, trying to work out if there's much difference between those 3 models. All in all, I don't think Stevie was that fussy about his pedal choice. He just literally got whatever was newest, which is interesting because if you was to apply that same mindset on today's gear, would Stevie be using a Helix or something crazy like that? Now, the other pedal that was a staple throughout Stevie's whole career was his wah pedal, which when you look at pedalboard pictures, you tend to see a Vox wah pedal. Again, I think Stevie just used whatever he could find. I know at one point he actually used a Vox wah pedal that used to belong to Jimi Hendrix, which I think he got from Jimmy Vaughan. I've also seen reports of Stevie using Vox wahs with TDK red inductors inside. We've got one of those in our old school Vox wah, and it sounds really bang on. We recently bought a vintage Clyde McCoy wah, which is supposed to be the holy grail, and it did have that extra throatiness with the sweep of the wah. But again, if you're looking for these types of pedals somewhat on a budget, the Tube Screamer is still being made today, and so is the Vox wah. So you could buy those two for probably under about £150, especially if you buy used. Later on in Stevie's career, you can hear the implementation of a fuzz face pedal and also an Octavia pedal. On Stevie's 1989 performance at Austin City Limits, you can hear one of the best fuzz tones you'll ever hear, and Stevie used his fuzz face, which was modified by Cesar Diaz. Now, Cesar Diaz was Stevie's guru behind the scenes who used to mod all of his amps and pedals and just get the most out of them that he could. We make a pedal porn fuzz, and it's actually based on Stevie's actual fuzz that he used to use, which had the Cesar Diaz mods, and it's got that insanely fat sound, but when you roll back your guitar's volume knob, you get an insanely glassy, clunky sound, which you can hear very prominently on the Stevie Ray Vaughan later concerts, such as Austin City Limits. There's also a live in Amarillo, Texas concert where you can hear Stevie really using a fuzz face heavily. Now, on the Austin City Limits concert, you can hear Stevie and you can see him using a Roger Mayer Octavia. This is the octave up sound that is synonymous with like the purple haze sound. Jimi Hendrix made that sound very famous throughout his career. Now, the interesting thing is, Stevie actually said that he preferred the Tycho Brahe Octavia as opposed to the Roger Mayer. Again, I'm not really trying to plug our own stuff, but just out of interest, we based our pedal porn Octone on a perfect blend of the Roger Mayer Octavia and the Tycho Brahe Octavia and merged them together so that you get that really ultra clean sound of the Roger Mayer, but you get the fatness of the Tycho Brahe. Therefore, to me, it's the perfect blend of the two. One aspect of Stevie's tone that was actually quite overlooked really is his use of the Fender Vibrotone. This is a single rotating speaker cabinet, which is like what organ players use, but this is actually the smaller cabinet, the Leslie 16 model, which was originally designed for guitarists as opposed to keyboard players. The swirling tones of the Leslie really give that depth to the sound. Of course, everyone always talks about cold shot with Stevie using the vibratone, but it's also there very subtly on a lot of his stuff, especially live. It's just there in the background and again adds that textural sound to the whole overall sound. There's a couple of recordings where Stevie did actually use a Univibe pedal, which was, you know, everyone says it was made to recreate the sound of a Leslie. There's a bit of a point of contention there. People debate that, but I'm not really getting into that. For Stevie, it was more of a nod to Hendrix, and yeah, when Stevie used a Univibe, it was just a beautiful sound. Now, in terms of guitar picks, since I've been about 11 or 12, I've always used very skinny guitar picks, and only recently I've started to use the heavier gauge, and I can confirm it's really beefed up my Stevie style tones. Now, as a guitar player, one of the main comments I get on this channel is, why are you holding your pick like that? Most people will use their guitar pick how it was intended, with the sharper end facing down. From an early age, I've always liked to turn the guitar pick so you're using the fatter end. And I've heard that Stevie used to do the same thing. Can you hear a difference in tone here? This is the sharper end. This is the thicker end. Maybe, maybe not, but either way, I've got used to using this upside down, thicker side now. But yeah, Stevie was reported to have used it upside down, so maybe try it yourself. Now, last but not least, the main important part to take away from this whole video, and it's the answer we all don't want to hear, but to sound the most like Stevie, you needed Stevie's big fat hands. You could plonk a guitarist like me right into Stevie's actual setup, and I'd still sound like me trying to be Stevie, whereas you'd put Stevie in my gear here and he'd sound like Stevie as well. We can try and do the rakes and the bends, the stinging vibrato, the different picking techniques. We can even buy a Stevie Ray Vaughan tribute guitar, but we're never gonna quite sound like Stevie, of course. And you don't really want to either, you know, you want to be known for your own sound, and hopefully that is a goal that we are all working towards. So I'm now going to deploy my best Stevie style chops. I really hope this guide was helpful. Let us know in the comments if we've missed anything major. I feel like we've missed something major. I'm probably gonna get some major backlash for this video, but we are on the way to 200k subscribers. Please subscribe if you haven't already. We'll catch you in a bit, and cheers.